Writing. The entire town of Red Creek believed Emily Parker had made the biggest mistake of her life. When word spread that she was marrying Jack Dawson, the quiet cowboy who lived on a run-down ranch outside town, people couldn't understand why. Emily was intelligent, beautiful, and had a promising future. She had turned down a high-paying job in Denver to stay close to her aging grandmother, and many assumed she would eventually marry someone wealthy or successful. Instead, she chose a man who wore worn boots, drove an old pickup truck that rattled every time it started, and spent his days mending fences and caring for cattle. On their wedding day, the church was filled with smiles, but behind many of them were whispers. "I feel so sorry for that girl," one guest quietly murmured. "She'll spend her whole life struggling," another replied. Emily heard enough of the conversations to know what everyone thought, but she never let it show. As she looked into Jack's eyes while exchanging vows, she saw something none of the others seemed able to notice. She saw honesty, loyalty, and a quiet strength that couldn't be bought with money. Their story had begun almost 2 years earlier during one of the worst snowstorms Wyoming had seen in years. Emily had been driving home after visiting her grandmother when her car suddenly broke down on a lonely highway. Heavy snow reduced visibility to almost nothing. Car after car drove past without stopping. She had nearly given up hope when an old pickup truck pulled onto the shoulder. Out stepped Jack. Without asking for anything in return, he spent more than an hour in freezing temperatures repairing the damaged engine. His hands turned red from the cold, but he never complained. When the car finally started, Emily reached into her purse and offered him every dollar she had. Jack smiled and gently pushed her hand away. "You'll need that more than I do," he said. "Just promise me you'll get home safely." She thanked him, expecting never to see him again. Instead, fate kept bringing them together. She ran into him at the local grocery store, at the county fair, and later at a charity event where Jack had quietly volunteered without telling anyone. Slowly, conversations turned into coffee, coffee turned into long walks, and before either of them realized it, they had fallen deeply in love. Jack never tried to impress her with expensive gifts. Instead, he brought her wildflowers he picked during long rides across the ranch. He remembered every little thing she told him, from her favorite childhood books to the songs her father used to sing. When Emily had difficult days caring for her grandmother, Jack simply showed up with homemade soup and stayed beside her without saying much. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. After the wedding, Emily moved into Jack's small farmhouse. The house was older than she expected. Rainwater leaked through one corner of the roof whenever storms rolled in. The kitchen cabinets creaked loudly whenever they were opened, and the porch steps needed repairing. Yet every room was spotless because Jack took pride in caring for what little he owned. Life there wasn't luxurious. Most mornings began before sunrise. Jack prepared breakfast while Emily brewed coffee. Then he headed outside to feed the horses and cattle while she watered the small vegetable garden they hoped would reduce grocery expenses. Money was always tight. Sometimes they carefully planned every purchase, choosing only the essentials. Emily found a part-time position at the local library, while Jack continued working long days on neighboring ranches in addition to caring for his own land. Despite the challenges, Emily found herself happier than she had ever been. Every evening they shared dinner together, laughing about small moments from the day. They watched sunsets from the porch swing and dreamed about building a better future one step at a time. Still, one thing about Jack puzzled her. Every Saturday afternoon, without exception, he disappeared for several hours. Sometimes he left in his old pickup. Other times he saddled his favorite horse and rode toward the mountains. Whenever Emily asked where he was going, Jack smiled warmly. "I'm just taking care of something." "What kind of something?" she asked one afternoon. "Nothing you need to worry about." His answer was always kind, never suspicious, but it never explained anything. Emily trusted him completely, so she chose not to press further. As the months passed, however, she couldn't ignore the strange pattern. Jack always returned just before sunset looking thoughtful but peaceful. His clothes were usually clean, and occasionally she caught the faint scent of expensive cologne that certainly hadn't come from their little farmhouse. One evening, while folding laundry, she discovered something unusual inside Jack's jacket pocket. It wasn't another woman's phone number or anything that suggested betrayal. It was a gold-colored key attached to a leather tag embossed with elegant initials she had never seen before. There was no address, no explanation, just the heavy key. When Jack walked into the room moments later, Emily quietly slipped it back into the pocket without mentioning it. She didn't want to accuse him of anything. But for the first time since they had met, curiosity settled deep inside her heart. The following Saturday, after watching Jack drive away as usual, Emily stood on the porch for several minutes. She looked toward the distant hills where the dusty road disappeared between tall pine trees. She told herself she should stay home. She reminded herself that trust was the foundation of every strong marriage. Yet another part of her needed answers. Finally, she picked up her car keys, climbed behind the wheel, and quietly followed the same winding road Jack had taken, unaware that before the day ended, everything she believed about her husband, and the life they had built together, would change forever. Writing. Emily kept a careful distance as she followed Jack's old pickup along the narrow mountain road. After nearly half an hour, the dusty trail opened to a pair of towering iron gates hidden behind rows of ancient pine trees. She slowed her car, expecting Jack to stop and unlock them, but the gates swung open automatically the moment his truck approached. Her heart raced. She parked just beyond the entrance and stared in disbelief. Beyond the trees stood an enormous stone mansion overlooking a sparkling lake. Perfectly trimmed gardens surrounded the property. A fountain rose proudly in the center of the circular driveway, and several luxury vehicles were parked near the entrance. The place looked more like the home of a billionaire than anything connected to the quiet cowboy she had married. Jack stepped out of his battered pickup as if nothing about the scene was unusual. Emily finally gathered enough courage to walk toward him. He noticed her almost immediately. A gentle smile crossed his face instead of surprise. "I wondered how long it would take before your curiosity won," he said softly. Emily stopped a few feet away. "Jack, whose house is this?" He looked at the mansion for a long moment before answering. "It's ours." She stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "Ours?" He nodded. "I wanted to tell you many times." "Then why didn't you?" Without saying another word, Jack led her through the massive wooden doors. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the afternoon sunlight pouring through enormous windows. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings. Family portraits decorated the walls, showing Jack as a young boy standing beside his parents in front of the very same mansion. Emily slowly turned to face him. "You inherited all of this?" Jack sighed. "My parents built one of the largest cattle companies in the state. They worked their entire lives to create something that would last for generations." He paused before continuing. "When I was 26, I lost them both within 6 months." Pain filled his voice. "After the funeral, people I barely knew suddenly wanted to become my closest friends. Relatives fought over money. Business partners cared more about profits than people. I couldn't tell who genuinely cared about me anymore." Emily quietly listened. "So I walked away." "You walked away from all this?" she asked. "I hired honest people to manage the company and moved to my grandfather's old ranch. There, nobody treated me differently because of money." He smiled faintly. "They treated me like a cowboy." Emily lowered her eyes. "And me?" Jack stepped closer. "When I met you beside that snowy highway, you didn't know who I was. You only knew I stopped to help." He gently took her hands. "As we fell in love, I became afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That if I revealed everything, I'd never know whether you loved me or my fortune." Tears filled Emily's eyes. "You really believe that?" "I've seen money change too many people." Emily wrapped her arms around him. "You stubborn man." Jack laughed quietly through his emotions. "I didn't marry you because of what you owned." She looked into his eyes. "I married the man who gave up his gloves to keep my hands warm during a snowstorm. I married the man who spends his Sundays repairing elderly neighbors' fences without charging them. I married the man who has the biggest heart I've ever known." Jack held her tightly. For the first time in years, the burden he had carried alone finally disappeared. Over the following weeks, Jack showed Emily every part of the estate. She learned that the mansion wasn't simply a symbol of wealth. It was also where the family business was managed. Hundreds of ranch workers depended on the company for their livelihoods. Scholarships for local students, donations to hospitals, and support for veterans all came from the foundation Jack quietly funded every year. He had never wanted recognition, only results. News eventually spread throughout Red Creek. The same people who had pitied Emily were stunned. The poor cowboy they had mocked was actually one of the wealthiest ranch owners in Wyoming. Suddenly, invitations arrived almost daily. People who had ignored Jack wanted to be his friend. Others apologized for judging him. Some even asked for jobs or financial favors. Jack welcomed everyone politely but remained exactly the same. He still wore his faded jeans. He still drove the old pickup. When Emily asked why he didn't replace it, he smiled. "That truck reminds me who I really am." A year later, the couple made a decision that surprised everyone once again. Instead of moving permanently into the mansion, they stayed in the little farmhouse where their love had grown. The mansion became something far more meaningful. Together they transformed it into a retreat for foster families, grieving widows, and children receiving long-term medical treatment. Empty guest rooms became temporary homes for people facing the hardest seasons of their lives. The grand dining hall filled with laughter every holiday. The gardens became playgrounds for children who had forgotten how to smile. One evening, Emily stood beside Jack on the porch of their modest farmhouse as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. "Do you ever regret living here instead of the mansion?" she asked. Jack looked across the fields, where horses grazed peacefully. "Not for a second," Emily smiled. "Neither do I." She realized then that the greatest secret Jack had hidden wasn't the mansion. It was the kind of man he truly was. His greatest treasure had never been measured in acres of land, expensive cars, or a fortune in the bank. It was his humility, generosity, and unwavering kindness. The town eventually stopped talking about how Emily had married a poor cowboy. Instead, people spoke about the couple who quietly changed countless lives without asking for anything in return. And whenever someone asked Emily what it felt like to discover her husband's secret mansion, she always smiled before giving the same answer. The mansion was beautiful, she would say. But the real treasure was the heart of the man who opened its doors. Because wealth can build impressive houses, only love can truly make them a home.